Hello and welcome to Enchantment of Eternity's review for Better Call Saul Season 4, Episode 8. I do believe it is pronounced Coushatta, if I got that correctly. This video is part of a series of videos where I review episodes of Better Call Saul, so I have to start with a spoiler warning for Better Call Saul up to Season 4, Episode 8. If you haven't seen up to this point, you may not want to watch this video, otherwise some things will be spoiled for you. So, I really liked this episode. I had a lot of fun. Parts of it were hilarious. There were some really interesting character moments. There were some really interesting setups. Getting sort of seeing the new sort of setup they have after like the 7-month time jump we had in last week's episode. And the follow-up, of course, to many of the things set up in last week's episode really worked for me. So let's go ahead and get into this. So let's start with Jimmy and Kim's plan. So at the end of last week's episode, we saw Kim grabbing a bunch of writing utensils and stuff in the store. She had some sort of plan because she told Jimmy to call off whatever he was doing, some plan to help Huel, who definitely didn't want to serve any jail time. So we see what that is in this episode as we see Jimmy going on a bus ride to Louisiana, and he meets random people and he pays the money to write letters, and we see that eventually the judge who's trying the case with Huel is overrun with a shitload of letters, and we see they're all coming from Jimmy, that he's either writing them himself or he's getting other people to write it. He's actually going to Huel's hometown, which I believe is pronounced Coushatta, and Louisiana, and just paying people off to have these massive amounts of letters. Now, in addition to that, Kim also has a plan, and I love this scene. It was absolutely amazing. I was laughing my ass off when she meets with the prosecutor, because we saw last time she met with the prosecutor, Kim was trying to be reasonable, but the prosecutor was being completely unreasonable. And last week I speculated maybe the prosecutor is friends with this police officer, or maybe she just has it in for Huel for some reason, but for some reason she has it in for Huel. And they didn't further that in this episode, so I still don't know why she had it in for Huel and was being so unreasonable, but the fact she was being so unreasonable pissed Kim off. So, it was so hilarious. Next time Kim met with her, she came in with like 4 other lawyers, like 4 associates, and they were being all professional and like, we're going to file this, we're going to file that. And the prosecutor, of course, knew right away what Kim was doing. It was like, look, you can draw me as much paperwork as you want. You can try to intimidate me with all these associates. Like, I don't understand why you're even paying for all these associates on this, minor case. And Kim's like, okay, fine, whatever. And, the prosecutor's like, it's not going to work, you should call it off. And Kim's like, okay, whatever, we'll see. And I love that scene. That was so great, but it went straight from that scene to the scene with Judge Neelix getting all the like cartloads of letters and complaining. Is like, look, this case is not that important. There's no way we should have those letters. Work it out. So that was like a 2-pronged plan. It was sort of pressuring this prosecutor, getting the judge to pressure the prosecutor to take a deal. Whereas first, the deal that Kim offered, the prosecutor was completely rejected, saying, there's no way I'm taking this deal. But then, of course, all the letters came in, and then she called, there was numbers on the letters, so she called to verify, and it turned out that we see, and this was great, because at first we just see from the prosecutor's perspective of her calling like these numbers and listening to these answering machines and talking to these people, but then they showed the other perspective, and it's Jimmy and the film students. I think this is the first time we've seen the film students this season. I love how they keep bringing these film students back. They show the girl who I think was the makeup girl, but she talked about how she was doing taking improv classes or whatever, and she was putting on the southern accent and being like, shame on you. And then next time when they call the church, it's actually Jimmy pretending, putting on the southern accent, pretending to be the reverend or whatever. And he's a hero. Oh my god. I was losing my shit in that scene. It's maybe the funniest scene this show has ever done. And it was absolutely brilliant because you see Jimmy sitting at the table with like tons of cell phones in front of him, because we know, like, he has access to all these cell phones because that's what he do. He sells cell phones. So he uses that. And so all the numbers he gave obviously correspond to a different cell phone. They all keep track, and they even had like CDs that the students would play in the background and have like a whiteboard that had the scripts and contingencies and what they would say when they got a call. It was absolutely brilliant. Now, it is interesting that Huel wasn't even in this episode, but he kind of doesn't need to be, because it wasn't really about him so much as it was about Jimmy and Kim's, like, their gambit. Now, to me, the most interesting twist, the most interesting turn in all of this is, the scheme worked, of course, and eventually the prosecutor had to give in because, Jimmy pretending to be the reverend was like, oh, we're going to get our buses and chartload people over there. And of course he knew. It's funny because he couldn't follow up on that threat, but he knew he wouldn't have to. He knew simply the threat of it would, that the prosecutor couldn't risk that happening because that would piss off the judge. So it forced her into making a deal. And so it worked and made a deal. Now, the interesting twist here, though, the thing that kind of surprised me, is that doing this really turned Kim on. Now, it's interesting because earlier in the episode, we see that Kim is not happy with Jimmy. They're still being very distant. Even when they're starting the scheme, she's just listening to music and kind of like, yeah, whatever, get your own food, I'm good, whatever. And we see Jimmy go to the nail salon, and the person who works there could tell that it's like, oh, she's mad at you. And they're drinking vodka, and she's like, just say you're sorry, and say you're sorry some more. And he's like, I think we're beyond that. So this is what I've been saying for a long time now. Throughout the season, they've been hammering home the point that Kim and Jimmy's relationship is dying. So back to the twist. The twist I did not see coming is that this invigorated their relationship. I did not see that coming. I did not see that as soon as their scheme worked and she got the deal, Kim went straight to making out with Jimmy. And that was so great because Jimmy's like, so what happened? What did it work? And she just starts making out with him, and it really turns her on. So this is kind of makes sense because it's a callback to season 2 where they pulled the scheme where she pretended to be Giselle or whatever, and that invigorated her, it turned her on. But eventually she's like realized, I can't do this all the time because I need to go back to my proper life, and she was trying to push Jimmy into a proper life. What's interesting here though is that when she goes back to the Mercer Verde, and the head guy there is talking about doing this really expansive thing that would be extremely time consuming for Kim, and she says, oh no, that's implausible. I'll agree with Paige because Paige is saying it's not plausible, but I don't know this for certain, of course, but I get the impression that it is possible. It would just be very time consuming for Kim, and she doesn't want to do this. You can see in that scene, you can see how bored she was with the whole just doing the Mercer Verde thing. And so when she goes to Jimmy does this song and dance about, look, I'm sorry about this. This is the last time. We're never going to do this again. I knew exactly what Kim's response was going to be, and it's, let's do this again. So this is a nice turn. So I kind of got a new prediction, a new sense of where this might go. Because before I was thinking that nothing bad was going to happen to Kim. Now I think it might. I think that this drive for her is kind of different than it is for Jimmy. I think Jimmy, as we see, he can keep doing this sort of conning thing and get by and not have it affect him, and he's ultimately okay. I get the sense that this is somehow going to ruin Kim's life. That she's not like Jimmy. She can't just bounce back for something like this, and or it's going to come close to ruining her life. Might not ruin her life, but something's going to happen where she's going to realize she can't be around Jimmy anymore. It's a very interesting push and shove relationship. It's still a toxic relationship, even though I would say the relationship is invigorated and she's crushing on him now. It's not a healthy relationship because the reason she crushes on him is because he excites her, but he excites her by doing illegal, shady, conning shit. So that's not very healthy. But it's very fascinating television. Absolutely loved it. I cannot wait to see where they take this next. It's brilliant. Anyway, let me move on to Mike and the German Men, I call it in my notes. So this is kind of more setup. Not saying that's a bad thing, not at all. But I'm still waiting to see where they're going with this. It's an interesting twist because as I was saying, they've kind of been setting up that Kai fellow to be like the troublemaker, like something bad's gonna happen, and I was like, oh yeah, something bad's gonna happen with him, and it kind of did in this episode, but it wasn't that big of a deal. Like he was like, touching the stripper or whatever, which is, not allowed, and they kicked him out, and so Mike had to come in and pay off the bouncer and give some money to the stripper and force Kai to leave. But this episode in particular kind of makes it seem like Kai was a red herring. That the real issue was the head guy. I'm sorry, I don't have his name in front of me. But the main guy who seemed like a nice old man, but he did something really stupid in this episode. He was just talking to some random people at a bar and started telling them about the super secret meth lab they're building. Now, I know he didn't say any specifics about like meth lab or something, but he did mention he was being a bit too more specific than he was supposed to be. Put it that way. And so Mike had to immediately shuffle him off, and it was really interesting. The next scene where Mike really gave him a talking to, and he was just trying to say, look, trying to say, the man I work for, he's paying you tons of money. This is super illegal. He's very discreet and secret. You know what the consequences. Do you know what I'm saying to you? And of course, like, he said that he understand, but I'm kind of wondering if he did, because I think obviously what Mike was getting at is he's going to kill you. If you run your mouth off like this, if you really fuck things up, if something goes horrible, you're dead, and possibly all of your men are dead as well. I'm not sure if he got this or not. He said he got it, but I don't know if he knows how dire, because he doesn't know like Gus, and how we know Gus because we've seen him on the show a bit, and his backstory and what he does in the future. So we know that he is one evil motherfucker, someone who's not to be fucked with. I'm not sure this guy completely grasps this yet. So it's really interesting. But I say Kai's a red herring, but maybe not. Maybe he will do something and will be tied into this other guy or whatever. I don't know. It's kind of an interesting twist. And again, I just want to see where they take this. Now, let me touch on Nacho, because we haven't seen Nacho in several episodes. In fact, some people were wondering what he's been up to, because there was a time jump in last episode and we didn't get any of Nacho. So we see what he's up to after, I think it was like a 7 or 8 month time jump. We see that he's now the head of, he's pretty much become Hector Salamanca. Really, he's taken over his job as being the head scary guy who runs all the business, because it used to be Hector would sit in the corner behind Nacho while Nacho was like, it was funny because of one scene we had, I think it was last season, Nacho went to Crazy 8 and Crazy 8's like, I'm sorry, I'm short, and Nacho was not strict enough to him, so Hector came over and like did something like punched him or something more violent. And it was weird getting a sort of different version of that same scene, except Crazy 8 now was in the position that Nacho used to be, and Nacho was in the position that Hector used to be. And we saw some other random guy with all these jewelry coming out and be like, oh, I'm sorry, I'm short. And Crazy 8's like, don't worry about it. And Nacho has to be what Hector used to be, and like rip the jewelry out of that guy at his ear and bleeding everywhere. And Nacho just says Crazy 8, wow. Crazy 8's like, oh, you had to do that. And Nacho's just like, well, why didn't you? So it is interesting as that he's moving up in the food chain. Now, what wasn't touched on this episode, but it kind of implied from what we've seen before this season, is that Gus is controlling him. Now, I don't think Gus is actively controlling him all the time. I think Gus is, for this past 8 months or whatever, has left him alone. But Gus has that thing over Nacho. So that next time Gus needs something, he's going to pull that screen. He's still, Nacho still has, I think as Gus said before, he owns him. I don't think it's an active thing, like he doesn't visit him every day or send his men over every day to tell him what to do. But I think if he needs him or needs him to stop doing something, he's going to pull on that string, and Nacho will have to obey. So that's an interesting dynamic. And then at the end of the episode, we get introduced to this Eduardo character who's apparently a Salamanca, and he's coming in, making dinner, being all nice and friendly, blah blah. But Nacho knows this is not any good, in that he's basically probably going to try to take over Nacho's job and position. He's like, oh, you don't even notice I'm here, and it's so obvious that's bullshit. And it's obvious that Nacho's not okay with this guy. So that's going to bring up some interesting things. But as I said, it's just kind of set up in this episode. But yeah, it's a pretty interesting setup. Anyway, my rating for Coushatta out of 10 is a 9. Excellent. Great episode. I think that's, as I said, that scene with the cell phones putting on the sudden actions, I think it's the funniest scene in the whole show. And the dynamic between Jimmy and Kim, how their relationship is still toxic but in a very different way. Very interesting. I can't wait to see it. I'm really interested to see where they go with the German dudes and with Nacho and this new fella. Really great. Anyway, that is it for my review of Coushatta. I will be back here every week for the last 2 episodes of Better Call Saul to review those episodes as well, so be sure to check that out. Also, be sure to check out my channel as I do many other videos on other shows like Game of Thrones, Star Trek The Expanse, and more, so be sure to subscribe so you can keep up with all of that. And thanks a lot for watching.